Good afternoon, and let us settle down. We could probably close one of the gates so that people can move in. And hope you had a great charcha over lunch. Chai pe charcha, now lunch pe charcha. And keep continuing the dialogues as we do. Before we begin, a few housekeeping. Please put your mobile phones on silent mode so that there's no disruption. If you need any guidance at all, there are people in the Charcha t-shirt. You can just contact them for any kind of assistance you may need. And there is in your agenda, the kit that was given to you, there is an agenda sheet, and behind the agenda sheet there is a QR code for the feedback. And throughout the panel discussion, there will be, the questions will be through the menti.com. The questions will be displayed on the QR code will be displayed and you can ask the questions. So just jumping on to the session, we are delighted to have Generations India Foundation as the cohort this year again, exclusively leading the youth and skills theme. And we had two compelling panels. The morning we did have a discussion on solving the skills conundrum. Can tech and processes unlock the skills with quality? And now we have the power of evidence, how impact can be the catalyst in skills. So I would now like to welcome Mr. Vivek Pandit to deliver the keynote address for the session. Vivek is the COO of Generations India Foundation, an independent non-profit focused on skill development. In his 4 years with Generation, Vivek has led several innovative initiatives, including Project Amber, expanding operations to 22 states in India, launching an online upskilling program, partnering with the state governments like Telangana, Himachal Pradesh and Odisha. So Vivek also comes with a decade of leadership experience across sectors in education and as well as an entrepreneur. So over to you, Vivek, for the keynote.
Thank you. I welcome the audience to this session. Thank you for taking out time for Charcha and for this session. A small keynote about Generation India Foundation and what we do before we jump into the panel. Generation is a global skilling entity that seeks to connect youth with jobs through skilling. Our mission and vision, we transform education to employment systems to prepare, place. Is this better? Yeah. We transform education to employment systems to prepare, place and support people into life-changing careers which would otherwise be inaccessible for them. And our vision is a meaningful career and sustained well-being for every person anywhere in the world. So Generation is now present in around 17 countries around the world. There is a global entity based out of Washington which supports with research insights with our methodology and various training initiatives, and there are country affiliates. Generation India Foundation is the affiliate for India. So what is it that Generation seeks to solve? As an independent not-for-profit, we are aiming to tackle the dual challenges of lack of trained workforce and non-employability of large sections of youth. We are all aware of the employment problem. There is low employment and income despite there being a lot of spending in the public skilling system, not only in India, globally. And there is a lack of coordination between the various stakeholders. Employers, we routinely say that trained people are not available and the youth are unemployed in large numbers. And then there are training providers, social services and funders. We seek to This lack of coordination causes a lot of problem. And then there are systemic barriers like socioeconomic status, gender and age. And employers continue to hire based on resumes rather than skills, right? These are the problems that restrict people from reaching out to their jobs and getting into a meaningful career. Our solution is on the right hand side. This is a snapshot, a 30,000 feet view, which is a 7-step methodology. Our processes obviously run far deeper, but this is like a snapshot of what we do. So all our processes, including our training programs, any project that we take they all initiate from the at the gate of the employer. So whichever job role we need to develop, there's a lot of study done, and the job role development and the curriculum development takes place. We also look at the resilience of the job role, because we live in a very fluid world these days, and what is a hiring sector right now may not be that a year from now or even 6 months from now. So there's a lot of market prediction that is required. Basis the inputs that we get, we recruit learners based on their intrinsic aptitude and their ability to do well in that job role. And then there's a training cohort that starts, which runs for between 6 weeks to 3 months. There's a very detailed training SOP, which I'll not get into, but then the learners are provided with jobs, and there's a mentorship that follows them into the industry, and there's community support which is also provided to them. We also routinely do ROI studies for employers, graduates, as well as the society, to see how is, let's say, every rupee being spent on skilling being returned to the stakeholders. And at the center of all of it is data. There's a lot of emphasis on data, and we work with hundreds of thousands of data points to take the right programmatic decisions and to decide how to go forward. And coincidentally, that's also the topic which we have today. We'll be coming back to that. A little bit about Project Amber. This is a key project that we've been involved with over the last 2.5 years. Generation India Foundation, along with NSDC and Ministry of Skill Development, under World Bank's Sankalp program, initiated the program, which aims to train and place 30,000 people, 50% of them female. The program is about to come to an end right now, and it's had very good sterling outcomes, some of which we'll talk about. Close to 34,000 learners have been enrolled. The pass rate has been very good at around 90%, with 51% women participation. What we've also tried to do is to build capacities across the ecosystem. 1,300 plus staff and participants of training partners of the ecosystem have been trained, including trainers. And there's a 73% placement rate. The placement rates here, which we talk about, are all validated through a third party. And there's 31 crores of fundraising which has been done through the private sector and philanthropy. With that, I'll pass it on to my colleague Nandita.
Thank you, Vivek. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you once again for coming together to delve into a topic that is crucial for the future of our workforce: the power of evidence and how impact can be the catalyst in skill development. In today's rapidly evolving world, where the demands of industries are changing at an unprecedented pace, the need for effective skill development has never been more critical. Governments, donors, employers are investing heavily in training programs to equip individuals with the skills necessary to thrive in the modern economy. But the question that stands before us is, are these programs truly making a difference? How do we know if our efforts are bearing fruit? That is where the power of evidence comes into play. Evidence-based decision-making is not just a buzzword. It's a transformative approach that has the potential to reshape how we design, implement, and evaluate skill development programs. By rigorously measuring impact through data and analytics, we can move beyond assumptions and truly understand what works, what doesn't, and why. And as shared by Vivek in his keynote address, at Generation India Foundation, data is at the center of our methodology. As part of our data and impact initiatives, we had engaged Mathematica, a globally renowned research agency, to conduct a multi-year evaluation of our program. The evaluation was conducted in 2 phases. While the first phase covered short-term outcomes, the second phase focused on long-term outcomes, where learners were reached out after 12 months of training completion. The evaluation used both qualitative and quantitative methods and compared outcomes of generation learners with learners from similar skilling programs in the public sector, and they were of the same professions. And I'm happy to share some of the key findings of this evaluation exercise with all of you today. We found that 66% of our generation learners found employment within 90 days of training completion versus 21% in the comparison group. As far as quality of job or the relation to the job is concerned, 85% of generation graduates were employed in jobs directly related to their training, while 51% in case of the comparison group. And if we talk about wage outcomes, we find that generation learners earned more than around 14 to 38% higher than the comparison group. Apart from employment and wage outcomes, we also measured well-being indicators of economic empowerment and found out that about 8 in 10 female employed learners provided input into almost all or most decisions on how to spend their earnings. And in the long term, at 1 year, we find that 44% of generation learners continue to be employed at 1 year versus 25% in case of the comparison group. And Mathematica was able to conclude with reasonable confidence that the positive difference in this employment outcome was attributable to generation's methodology. With this, I now move to the panel discussion where we will discuss this in more detail, and we'll explore how evidence of impact can drive innovation in skill development. We look at real-world examples, discuss best practices, and consider the challenges we must overcome to fully harness this power. To discuss these important aspects, we have a very impressive set of panelists. First, I would like to welcome Mr. Gabriel Bordado, Skills Specialist for the Southeast Asian region at ILO. Can we have a huge round of applause for him? In his last 5 years, he brings over 25 years of extensive experience in skill development sector, and in his current role provides policy advisory services to all stakeholders in the skills ecosystem for strategizing efforts for employment promotion. Welcome, Gabriel. Next, we have Mr. Jayant Rastogi, Global CEO of Magic Bus India Foundation. He has over 35 years of experience in conceptualizing and driving scalable businesses for MNCs and startups. Under his exceptional leadership, Magic Bus has witnessed a remarkable growth and expanded operations across 23 states since 2016. Welcome, Jayant. Now, I would like to welcome Shriya Sethi, Senior Expert at McKinsey & Company, where she co-leads the social sector practice for India to help drive programmatic change in the social sector. Welcome, Shriya. Finally, I would like to invite Priyanka Yalamanchili, Monitoring and Evaluation Manager for Generation Global. She leads the impact strategy and program evaluation across 17 countries spanning the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. She brings strong expertise in translating complex data into actionable insights, supports evidence-based decision-making for the organization globally. Welcome, Priyanka. Now I invite Vivek to take this over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanita. After that very insightful note, we move on to the topic for the day, which is the power of evidence, how impact can be the catalyst in skills. I'm very pleased to have a very esteemed panel with me today, and I'm hoping that all of us have a very riveting discussion. As we know, skilling is pivotal for a country like India, with a population which is possibly the highest in the world now, and a demographic dividend which some people say can also be like a disaster if it is not handled well. Skilling, quality skilling is very important, but how do you establish whether skilling is going well or it's not doing well? A lot of it will have to do with what is the right metrics to measure and what kind of evidences are put forth, right? Which is something which may not have been done to the right extent, sufficient to satisfy the key stakeholders. And that is the topic that we'll discuss today, with hopefully good insights coming out, right? So I'll start with the first question. Gabriel, if we can start with you. There's a mic in front of you. I'll just read out your question. What is your understanding of impact in the skilling space? In your opinion, what are the key metrics that we should measure while doing impact assessment in this space?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vivek. First of all, on behalf of my organization, the International Labour Organization, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting us here to discuss and to be part of the panel that really looks at skilling towards a decent work. Just to give you a context, ILO is a specialized UN agency. When we say specialized, it's very different from the other UN agencies. Considering that the composition of the ILO is tripartite, meaning we do have collaboration, we do have representation from the government, which is being represented by the Ministry of Labor, the employers group, and the workers group. That's our advantage. And we're really looking, and I'm part of the set structure of ILO that really looks at the secretariat. I mean, we do have offices in several countries. And one of our key, like in our case here in Decent Work Team for South Asia, which is based in India, my intervention is really working with these three constituents. We call it constituents, but actually these are social partners, to really look at how do we reform the TVET or the skills development that would address the skills demand from the industry. So that's the context of my office. And going back to the question, Vivek, really looking at impact. Apology, I have listed mine so that I will not forget the key recommendations. And by the way, we do not do training program, as I mentioned earlier. We do advise the government or the member state in terms of how to do the right thing. Not really the right thing, but the things that are required to really address the issue of supply and demand. Okay, so I'd like to really look at the key metrics for impact assessment in the skilling space. Everybody's talking about outcome-based. But let me just highlight to you some key details of that outcome-based. First of all, this is the very basic matrix, which is skills acquisition, meaning we test the trainees or the candidates before the training program and after the training program. So that's one key matrix. And under that, we have the post and the pre and post training assessments, as well as the certification rate. This key indicator is being used most commonly in all countries. But this is not the only one that would serve as the basis for a successful training intervention. The other point, impact indicator, is the employment outcome. Really, job placement rates, which really looks at the percentage of trainees who have gained employment. The retention rate, how long does the participants stay in the new job? I think we need to really look at that as one of the indicators. And the very difficult one under these key indicators is the career progression, the promotion and advancement within a certain period after the training. Does the trainee progress on a higher level or just stayed in the same level for a couple of years on that? The rest are really looking at the feedback survey. It's commonly used. But the difficult one, which we really have problem in terms of encouraging the member state, is on the economic impact. The income growth, the changes in participants' earning before and after the training. We do have to have that kind of data. And basically the return on investment that really looks at financial benefit to the organization or economy relative to the training. So by that, I think that's the point that I really wanted to highlight in terms of some impact indicators. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Gabriel. That was insightful. We'll keep those in mind when we do further discussion. Jayant, I'll move on to you. Why is data-based evidence important in skills? What are the challenges that a skilling entity like yours faces in India when you do impact measurement?
Thank you, Vivek. Firstly, a little bit about just about Magic Bus. I'm relatively new to the sector, 8 years, but I call that relatively less because I've spent probably 40 years, working. So 8 years is a small time. So I'm no expert over here. Just want to call that out. Magic Bus, I think what we are known for is scale. We are probably one of the largest implementation organizations in the country today. We work in two spaces. So one is adolescence, where we work with young people who are probably in the senior primary, 12, 13, 14 years of age. We provide them with life skills, with special focus on girls, and see that they complete school education, they get into either sustainable jobs, or if they get drop out, they get into sustainable jobs, or they get into higher education. So that's one of our programs. And here we have, this year, if you talk about it, across the country, we have 30 lakh young people who will be part of our programs, working across the nook and corner of the country. On the other side, we are one of the largest skilling organizations in the country. This year, we have 250,000, 2.5 lakhs young people, with 60% participants being girls, being part of our program, and with almost 90 odd % getting jobs. And we work only as of now, we work in grey collared and the digital white collar spaces. We also have programs on the entrepreneurship development, where they're in rural areas where there are no jobs. So that's about Magic Bus. So just a couple of words about myself. I love scale. I believe in technology, data. And I think that's one thing which I've brought to Magic Bus. We've scaled phenomenally over the last few years. And I think, data is the bedrock of evidence and decision making. So I'll start with that. And our philosophy internally within Magic Bus is about innovation, bringing technology and data. I would just put this into a couple of points as to, what actually data does. So if you look at data, one is it creates awareness, raising awareness, number one. So this is about, for example, there are formal workers, there are informal workers, there are women who are in informal. So data gives you what are the solutions that you actually bring out for these different section of people. The second is about informed, targeted interventions. So once you have data, you understand what the behavior is, then you can try and decide what the solutions could be. For example, when I go to our livelihood centers, I'm on Facebook. When I ask my youth how many on Facebook at our centers, very few hands go up. And when I ask Insta, all the hands go up. So on what channels do you communicate? What do you do? How do you connect with them? So you need to understand that. For that, you need data, obviously. Moving to, after that, whatever are the interventions and solutions, you need to have proper monitoring and assessment. If you can't measure it, you don't progress. That is our belief in Magic Bus. So we actually have assessments that, like I think, Gabriel said, we have pre and post assessments. We see how our young people are faring, how are they learning, what is working for them and what is not working for them. So we do a whole lot of innovation projects, and I can talk about one of the key innovation projects which kept us safe during COVID. So when COVID happened, a lot of money comes from CSR. So almost 40% of our monies actually went into Prime Minister's Care, and a lot of other schemes, rightfully so. And we were seriously thinking, can we sustain ourselves? How do we sustain ourselves? Because you have a fixed cost. And a lot of organizations were laying off people. We said, we won't lay off. We will actually take care, and we'll have a cascading salary cut at the highest level, the highest salary. And most of our people we won't touch. And just before COVID, what we'd done was, we'd actually done a program which was the job exchange. We'd done it with UNDP in rural Aurangabad, working only with girls. Now, working with girls is far more difficult than working with boys and placing them. And in rural setting, it even becomes much more difficult. So we worked with girls, we got a job platform, we actually got skill partners, we got the employers, and the beneficiaries or the participants onto that platform. And in a short time, we could place almost 2,000 plus girls. So this was an innovation program, very, very small by our standards. And when COVID happened, all our centers are physical. So you physically get these young people onto the centers and train them. And we knew that we just couldn't reach out. They couldn't come to the centers. So what we did was we rolled out a virtual program. And we did a survey, 70% of our communities were working at 20% of pre-COVID salaries, 50% had no salary at all. And we started working at that stage. And very quickly we were putting people back into jobs where people were losing jobs. So I think and we continuously keep monitoring, innovating, measuring what is the success, and then we roll it out on a larger scale. So I think assessments, monitoring is the other part. Also, challenging stigma. Again, a personal example, and I just thought it was important to share it. I used to actually head Motorola before this, South Asia. Then I moved into an entrepreneur's role. I did 2 technology startups. One flopped miserably, one did very well. In this very well startup, it was a technology startup. So we had some IIT ka bachchas and all that working with us. It was a small setup, a mezzanine floor and a niche ground floor usme. So, and the IIT bachchas had no problem coming and working for us over there. And I tried to get some of these people from, Magic Bus. They didn't want to work for such a small organization. They wanted to rather work for, Reliance, Big Bazaar or something than, this kind of organization. So how do you kind of find some of these, how do you change some of these things? And I think then policy and advocacy, obviously, working with the government, when you have huge data, you can influence, you can move things into a particular direction. I'm sure we all understand that. And lastly, I think the most important is about building trust and stakeholder support. So your data gives you the credibility, it gives you the honesty, it gives you the integrity to go. People want to give money. End of the day, you need money for causes which make sense, which they believe in, which they know that, has an outcome. And I think, again, coming back to Vivek's point about, outcome, I think, Gabriel, you said that outcome and evidence. So I think, that supports stakeholder confidence. So I would just end at that.
Thanks, Jayant. That was very interesting to hear the Magic Bus perspective and how data has helped in you in your journey. Shriya, we'll move on to you. How have you seen data being used effectively for impact in skilling? And alternatively, where have you seen data not being used well for decision making?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Vivek. So I'm a senior expert with McKinsey and co-lead the social sector practice here, do most of my work with nonprofits in the space of education, skilling, livelihoods, with a very strong focus on gender and how do you bring in more women into the workforce. So over the last few years, we've looked at this problem in many different ways. We've kind of tried to understand skilling. And the thing with data is you can use it to show whatever you want, right? I think data can be used to hide something, to show or tell a story. So it's really, important to kind of understand when somebody, it's important to question data as well, right? And not take kind of data at face value all the time. So I think the first thing is really kind of understanding where data is coming from and then disaggregating data. I think this is where I think some of our work has been really interesting when we've not taken data at face value. So if you look at, for example, gender, right? And we look at organizations that say, hey, we have 50% women representation in our organization. Great. But then when you start kind of going a little deeper and saying, what does that representation really mean? You unfold it and say, where in the spectrum are the women, right? And if it means 70% of your women are in entry roles or in administration roles, and we're seeing very few women in roles of responsibility or decision making, then that picture isn't a real picture, right? It's not a true representation of 50%. So breaking down and disaggregating data for decision making, I think, is extremely important. In skilling, where we looked at this and found it very interesting was when we started kind of saying, where are the skill centers in the country today, right? So even if you start looking at certain states and saying, if you look at per capita, it's fairly well covered, but then you start disaggregating and putting it in geographical and saying, are they really, if you look at the places where you have unskilled population and overlay that with where you have skill centers, it doesn't match, right? You have skill centers in urban centers where most of your unskilled population are in rural villages. So what will you do, just increasing the skill centers? So I think disaggregating data, questioning it and correlating it to what actually you want to solve for, right? I think to the question earlier and saying, what is the outcome you're looking for, what is the metric, and how is data helping you answer is some of the things that we've really spent time, I think and then I think this is the first part, right? Defining the right problem statement so you're creating the right solution. The second part of this is then actually using that data, to Jayant's point, towards identifying once a program is done, to also then question the data and saying, where was the success, right? So again, disaggregating and saying, if these were the 5 things we did in this program, really which of these 5 things really moved the needle? And we see this again and again in programs that, we are seeing a lot of emphasis on things that maybe reach a large scale of people or have a lot of visibility to those interventions, but the impact necessary isn't the same, right? There is a difference in impact. So really using data first to design the program correctly, and then to actually disaggregate the data to understand the impact. And I'm happy, to share maybe one of the most interesting solutions or interventions we looked at was when Educate Girls had actually used data very effectively, where they were working in the state of Rajasthan, and they said we want to identify. So they were working across the state of Rajasthan, very intensive human resource, ground, house to house, to identify where girls were out of school. So they could work with them to actually encourage them to get back to school. But then they started using data, and then they started saying, we don't need to be everywhere, right? We just need to work and identify what are the top 100 villages that have the maximum number of girls out of school, which reduces your expense, your human resources, your effort, but your impact is actually significantly higher, right? So those are some ways we've seen data used effectively as for both decision making and for monitoring.
Thank you, Shriya. I think that was very relevant, how to use data intelligently. Priyanka, coming to you. With your experience in managing M&E, monitoring and evaluation studies across 17 countries in generation, how do you measure impact beyond just the numbers served?
I think what I can talk about generation's philosophy and framework will bring together what the other panelists have said. So we've had a philosophy that if we just look at numbers served, then it eventually leads to a dilution in our program quality. So our impact measurement is a framework of simultaneously looking at what we call breadth, depth, and durability. So across all of the stakeholders we serve, what is our reach, what is the level of impact we are creating, and is that impact sustaining over time? Breadth, which is, I would say, the most common and often collected set of measurement across all organizations, is the number of learners we are training, the number of job roles we are training in, the locations we are operating in, the number of employers we are partnering with, and so on. Breadth part of our impact framework is really intended to establish the scale and diversity of our intervention. And then under the umbrella of depth, we have all of the program outputs that we want to see in the short to medium term. So for generation, that stretches up to 1 year after our learners graduate from our programs. So in this period, we look at what rate are they getting jobs? Are they staying in employment 1 year after the program, like how Gabriel had mentioned on retention? The other piece of our depth measurement is job qualities. We don't want to invest in training someone in a specific technical role and have them end up being Uber drivers and work in a completely unrelated role. So the quality that we are measuring is what is their income levels prior and now. Are they in stable employment contracts, say a permanent versus a fixed term contract? These are ILO definitions, versus short term or casual employment, which is not as stable or tends to be seasonal. Are they working in full-time employment or not, or are we seeing underemployment here? And we also measure workplace well-being as a full measure of job quality. There's also the employer side on which we are measuring depth. So we want to see how easy it is for them to hire from generation in terms of the number of candidates, the quality of candidates they are receiving, what share are hiring from us repeatedly, which is a very important measure for success in that we have fulfilled our goals for them, and what is our market share in the hiring space. So if there is a job role and there are 100 vacancies for that job role in the market, what share have been filled by generation graduates? And finally, and this is the durability aspect of our measurement, which we've really worked on putting in place in the last 4 to 5 years, is to see if all this amazing impact we've created is sustaining in the long term or not. If we are creating economic mobility for our learners, if we are seeing them progressing in their careers, and also we are seeing the right signs in place to know that they will progress, continue to progress even after we stop our intervention or even stop data tracking. So on this front, what we do is up to between 2 and 5 years after they graduate from our program, we look at their career progression, their financial health, and their overall well-being. And long-term impact measurement specifically has been really consequential for us in building more evidence about the return of investment of generation and skilling in general, and also opened up a new frontier for us in how we are helping our learners. So I want to give 2 examples here. One is about the long-term outcomes for women. So in Generation India programs, and it's a testament to the amazing work that is done over here, our women graduates are on par with their men peers when they graduate. So they are finding jobs at the same rate, and they are earning the same level of income. But then we start to see gaps emerge once we move beyond the 2-year mark. Fewer women are receiving promotions, more women are opting out of the labor force entirely, and even women who are employed are thinking about their career growth differently. They are more likely to want to switch jobs rather than seeking promotions in the jobs that they already at, which our male graduates chose overwhelmingly. These are not very surprising findings given the systemic issues we know are prevalent here, but seeing it laid out so starkly means that we cannot rest on our laurels that we have equalized outcomes immediately after graduation. So we are now in the stage of thinking more about what can we do within our program or in mentorship support immediately after the program, so that we can then bridge these long-term gaps that manifest 2 to 5 years out. The second example relates to what I spoke about job quality. So we built this 5-point framework of job quality across the pay, workplace conditions, and workplace well-being and employment types. And we saw that people who are in high quality jobs are more likely to be promoted, they are more confident in their careers, and they're also more satisfied with their life. And job quality is something we can influence right out the gate, like immediately after graduation. And knowing that now, our teams are now setting more targets beyond placement and retention to making sure that we have as many high quality jobs as possible. So just to say that our impact measurement and generation is geared towards not only helping our teams achieve the core outcomes of a skilling intervention, but also to make sure that we keep improving on our programs so that we are serving all profiles of learners equally.
Thank you, Priyanka. Depth, breadth, and durability sound like very good concepts. One important announcement for the audience. In case you want to put up a question, there are already some questions which have been put up by people on the menti.com. I'll have that screen come up again. You could just scan that and log in and put up your questions. We'll be taking some of your questions at the end of the session, which will be around 20 minutes from now. Gabriel, we'll start again with you. How is long-term impact being seen by an organization like ILO? And what are the trends in long-term impact that you're observing at the global level? And also any examples of successful projects that India can learn from?
Yeah, thank you very much, baby, for the question. I think if we have to really digest the question, it's 3 levels. First one is that how do we see as ILO the long-term impact? That's the first part of the question. The second part is on what are the global trends in terms of the impact, the long-term impact. And the third one are the good practices that we can share with you that India can learn something on or really adopt the model. On the first question, it's our office focused on the long-term impact of skilling through various strategies and framework. Our approach emphasizes on lifelong learning. Everybody hears this terminology, lifelong learning. Inclusive skills development, wherein everybody has an equal access to the program. And adaptability to the changing labor markets. This strategy is incorporated in the skills and lifelong learning for 2030 that highlights the importance of continuous skills development to meet the evolving demand for the global workforce. That's how ILO is looking at as the long-term impact. In terms of the global trends, in terms of long-term impact, I do have here 3 points that I'd like to highlight to you. One is the technological advancement. The rise of AI and automation is reshaping the job roles. necessitating continuous upskilling and reskilling. Digital literacy and technology expertise are becoming critical skills across industry. So the digital skills, even in the carpenter, even in mason, are being embedded for it to be sustainable, the workers to be sustainable. The second trend is on lifelong learning. Emphasis on lifelong learning systems to ensure that workers can adapt to the new job requirements and technologies, like embedding digital skills so that the person can be adaptable when he moves either laterally or vertically. Flexible learning pathways and innovative training programs are being developed to cater the diverse needs. This has been highlighted during the COVID and really now trying to look at models on flexible learning system. India is really good at this. It's one model of really have the good models. We have India's really a good wealth of data models in terms of flexible learning. The third global trend is economic and social shift. Global economic shifts are driving the needs for reskilling and upskilling to maintain the competitiveness. Social inclusion and equity in skills development are prioritized to ensure marginalized groups benefit from the training program. And then I'll move now to the models of examples of successful projects. The first one is ILO is directly, as I have mentioned earlier, that we provide advices to the member states. And our strategy here is really looking at focusing on improving the employability and productivity through targeted skills development initiative. As I mentioned earlier, our distinctive advantage in terms of providing interventions towards decent work is that we have the private sector as our member, we do have the government as our member, and we also have the workers group as our member. So in that sense, we like the models we have in Bangladesh, we have 3 big projects there that really focus on direct intervention to address the requirement of the industry. So we work hand in hand with both the government, the employers, and the workers group. The other one example that has been successful also here in India is what we call as the EIIP, Employment Intensive Investment Program. We implemented this in 2017 initially in India, but in other countries have been implementing it earlier. On the Ministry of Rural Development or road something. It's really looking at empowering the community to be trained as worker in terms of maintaining the roads or constructing new roads. We have one good example of this here, as I mentioned earlier, and the other one is in Afghanistan, in the northern part of Afghanistan before the change of administration. We do have this kind of setup of empowering the community to be trained as workers in the construction of roads and bridges. That's the ILO initiative. But I'd like to highlight 2 key private sector initiatives that we observe. Now, it's not necessarily an ILO. ILO is part of it, but one is the Microsoft. Microsoft is really aggressive in terms of providing digital skills, particularly to the disadvantaged, the likes of Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh. They do have intensive implementation of these skillings for digital skills. The other one is, I think, something to do with it's also digitalization. Coursera, I don't know if you're aware of Coursera. Yeah, it's one good model that we do try to advocate to other countries in terms of digitalization. So I think from here, as I mentioned earlier, the common denominator here is that the private sector is always there. For it to be successful, the private sector should be always there. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Gabriel. Jayant, moving on to you. What are the core skills that will transcend into the future from your organization's perspective and your own individual opinion also?
This is a question which is very dear to all of us over here. You know, what does the future hold for all of us? And we internally, you know, I have my team sitting right on the front, this thing, you know, Arun, Preeti, Nikhil. We keep grappling with this problem कि हम आगे क्या पढ़ाना चाहिए. In fact, can I ask you a question? See, what skills do you provide to a 5-year-old girl today that by 2040 when she's workable, she's relevant? See, the most important thing I think Gabriel, everybody's talking about is about staying relevant, right? So what skills do I provide to a girl? Okay, so see, if you look at technology today, Gabriel kind of, you know, alluded to that Microsoft is doing digital skilling, etc. See, do you teach them coding skills? Do you teach them language skills? No, AI will do it. You can't teach them that, right? To stay relevant, only skills that you can provide is to be a continuous learner, to be able to adapt themselves, stay relevant. And that happens through the ILO framework of 21st century skills, which is transferable, adaptable skills. So those are the only skills that you can give. So we've kind of, you know, launched a platform called FutureX. We've got good, decent funding for it, you know, from institutional funders, where we're looking at how we can actually, you know, create a live, living platform which is able to continuously keep evolving itself in terms of, you know, what is really required. One is bring unit economic cost down so that we can really skill at a large scale. We know that, you know, one of the other big problems other than jobs is also the employability level of the people who are graduating from the Indian universities. So how are we able to kind of really, you know, take care of that at a very, very huge scale, at a very low unit economic cost, leveraging technology and being prepared for tomorrow? So that's something that is kind of, you know, right now we've been working on. So I'll leave that. Not too many data points, Vivek, sorry, but I think, you know, this is much above data.
Thank you. That was helpful, Jayant. Shriya, question for you. What are some of the successful examples that you see which are creating an impact for learners and for employers?
Yeah, I just want to go back to Jayant's point because Jayant had written the exact same thing here, right? Is it, you know, what do you teach when by the time you're already teaching, it's irrelevant, right? At some point in time, we were working with the Ministry of IT on the digital policy, and they said by the time we come up with the policy, the tech is changed. So what do we do, right? So I think this future skills question and how do you use digital to teach. The other problem I think, and you know, Jayant, you work so much at scale is equity, right? So while we can have digital training platforms, when we again disaggregate it and we start seeing who actually has access to them, the equity lens is, we're very far from that, right? Even if you look at low income households, it'll be the elder child and traditionally the elder boy who has access to this, right? So then how do we actually in that space think about scale versus depth? Because one of the programs we've looked at, and now coming back to this, we've looked at many programs and we've said these are great programs and they've had great impact. And then the nonprofits typically come to us and saying, now we want to scale, right? And how do we scale? And then when we start looking at scale versus depth, we've actually seen very few programs that have had large scale impact at scale, right? So, you know, either you have large scale impact, so you touch a lot of people, but your scale is incremental, or you have very deep impact, but you're touching a smaller number of people, right? And the solution is always, oh, we can do this through digital, we can do this through digital, but I haven't seen an example of large-scale digital intervention that has deep impact, right? I don't know if we would love to see if anybody else has had. So I think this question of scale versus depth and how do you scale beyond policy. So every time you keep coming back to saying, hey, what works and what will you do with it? You codify, create a playbook, and then, you know, either you do policy advocacy or then you kind of share it with other nonprofits to scale, right? So really, that is where we've seen really good examples is, you know, where you've proven something in a small space, you know, maybe at education in 1 or 2 schools, maybe in skilling in a smaller geography, really kind of use data to do an impact assessment, shown that it works similar to the work you've done with Mathematica, but then really scaled it through either policy, so really working with the government to say this needs to happen everywhere, or then said, you know what, we'll open source it and whoever wants to use it in their programs, go ahead and use it, right? That's really, I think, and Jayant, would love to hear from you, right? You run such a large program. How do you do like deep impact on scale? It's fascinating.
I was really tempted to kind of talk about that. See, one of the biggest challenges when you scale, how do you keep the impact? And that I'm sure all of you, who've been or people from the sector or even outside, how do you manage that? And that's been one of the biggest challenges, and that's something that we've tried. I'm not saying that we've completely navigated that, but what we've done is, I believe my 4 Ps, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. I love speaking about this, okay? So my team is also smiling and laughing right now. So these 4 Ps, wherever I go, I kind of, talk about it. And I'm sure a lot of this is really useful. It holds you in good stead. First is people. So, and you need to measure whatever you do. So you need really passionate, good people in the sector who are aligned to your organization's vision, mission, and kind of delivering. So that's very, very important. The second is about, your programs and the impact. So how do you scale that? How do you kind of, so I'll come back to that, but, having a good deep program, which is at least, being delivered properly, sessions are happening, that is the second part. Measuring it, tracking it, the impact and the evidence. The third is process, which is the most important part. Now this is, in this context, this is the most important part. It is about building layers of technology. It is about transparency. It is about high governance. It is about outcomes. And that is your center stage in terms of building capacity in an organization. We've really invested deeply. Today, whether we get a project which is, 1 crore or 15 crore, for us, it is the same level of discomfort or convenience to execute that program. We build those kind of capacities. See, the biggest problem which a lot of us from the sector have is absorptivity. We don't have absorptivity. If a large program comes, we are not able to execute. In fact, I think today somewhere in the newspaper, they said there are such high underspends because organizations have not been able to spend money. So you have to build the strong processes to be able to scale and build capacity and also measure that and track it with data and evidence. And the last one is about, your partners. So if your data evidence is good, story is good, the partners will come to you. You don't have to go to them. So that's the last P which I would talk about. And we do a survey, again, data-based, very, very important. We actually do a partner survey where we look at how many partners of us, which are funder partners, are happy to recommend us to other partners. And saying this with a lot of humility, our current score is 96%, which is really, really, I think either we don't have competition or I don't know where we are, but it's a really, really good score. And we are very happy that, we are in that space as of now.
Thank you. Priyanka, moving to you. What is generation planning to do when it comes to impact measurement? And how are we planning to influence policy?
So I think when we seek to influence policy, we have 2 challenges here. Skilling is in an ecosystem of other educational interventions, and many of them have really great evidence on long-term impact. So think about early childhood education on one end or college education on another, where there is proven tons of research on its impact on lifetime earnings and impact on the broader family and so on. So how do we make an effective case for skilling in this ecosystem of other interventions as well? The second challenge is that the evidence that does exist, most of which has come from these independent studies by researchers and so on, is limited and also sadly a bit mixed. So Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, had reviewed 28 randomized impact evaluations done globally. And what they found was that although most programs at least modestly improved employment, only about half made an actual dent in increasing earnings. They also saw that in the long term, while some of the programs, the positive effects kept increasing, for others, it just faded out. And their conclusion was that to date, there is no clear understanding of what makes an intervention work in the short term versus long term. And we also had this experience closer to home. So Nandita spoke about the Mathematica evaluation. As part of that, they reviewed 17 evaluations of vocational training programs in low-income countries, and only 4 out of those 17 had even a statistically significant improvement in employment. There was another study, McKinsey et al., that also looked at the similar vocational education studies, and there was only a 2 points increase in employment on average across these different studies and different programs that they looked at. So what do we do about this? I can speak to what Generation is doing. We have a 3-pronged strategy to address this. One is we are all ourselves also engaging in several impact evaluations to contribute to this body of evidence on skilling. The Mathematica evaluation for our Gen India programs was one of them, and the approach we used there was quasi-experimental. So we compared outcomes of our learners with other learners under the PMKVY and public schemes who have also gone through similar training programs. In Brazil, we are in the process of conducting a randomized control trial with JPAL right now. And in the France and UK, because of the enormous availability of public data there, we are comparing our outcomes against available public data on employment and income changes when people go through trainings or people who are unemployed seeking jobs. That's the first front, and I think all organizations can employ some form of evaluations, cater to the kind of impact you're trying to measure, and also the stage at which your organization is in. So these different approaches that I mentioned has also been selected based on how advanced is the program already in that country, what scale are we in that country, and how stable are our outcomes, so that we can engage in these highly rigorous evaluations. The second bit is what we're doing internally in terms of analysis. So we want to establish this return of investment for skilling for the government. So in countries that have strong social safety nets and clear taxation schemes, the shape that this takes is what in France they refer to as avoided costs. How much costs are saved because you do not have to pay out for schemes that cater to unemployed people or low-income people, because you have now moved them into employment and you've secured a good level of income for them. For other countries, we are also looking at if we scale in the right way and get them the right amount of income, and if we benchmark that to living wages, which what is the amount of wage required for a basic but decent standard of living, then what is the effect on economic mobility? There is a lot of research out there that living wage is a sort of tipping point for financial health. So if you're above that, you are then on a good trajectory to keep growing, and it affects intergenerationally. So that's how we are trying to benchmark and, in essence, speak the language that governments want us to influence, create a broader set of influence. The final strategy is we're always more effective as a collective. So we're also trying to build consortiums of different organizations and together arrive at a standard set of metrics across short-term and long-term impact, so that we can create an open repository of impact across all the different organizations in a way that can encourage more interest and investment in skilling.
Thank you, Priyanka. So I think we've run out of time. We had one common question, which then I'll defer, and I'll move on to some of the audience questions. We have received around 12 questions. I think we'll be able to take around 3 or 4 of them in the next 10 minutes or so. So, okay. The first one, while it's important to refer to data to inform decisions in the development sector, how can one develop a strategy that centers metrics but does not reduce people to mere data points? I'll pass this to Priyanka.
Yeah, sure. I think the way we have done that is, like as Shriya mentioned, disaggregating the data. I think the more you look at, understand that different people have different journeys, and use the data in that way. So for example, with Generation, we work across countries like US and Europe, and also India and Kenya. And we are hyper aware that the people we work with in these different countries are different, like our learners are of different profiles. In India and Kenya, they are younger, they're mainly high school educated, and we are mainly training them in non-tech programs. So their trajectory to achieving economic mobility or advancing in living wage attainment is going to be different from what we see in the US or European countries. So I think I would say the way to not reduce people to data points is to disaggregate the data more and see what are your metrics for each unique profile that you serve.
Thank you. Next one, how does SROI, social ROI, work for skilling projects? Some example, please. Would you like to have a go at this, Jayant?
See, I think that's a really important parameter kind of measure, what is the social return on investment. So we continuously do that. And in fact, a recent study that we did, in fact, we did it last year, not recent, that was last year, right? So we saw that, see our livelihood program before COVID was just 8,000 odd people, right? 8,000 young people. It scaled up during COVID with, whatever initiatives we took. It is 250,000, 2.5 lakhs today. So we did not have these such large volumes as we are kind of intervening or providing programs to every year. So even for last year we had 130,000. So I think total income which these people have earned over the lifetime since they've been trained was almost adding up to $1 billion. So which is $1 billion adding to the economy from people who would otherwise not have done anything at all, you know. So when we look at the cost, you know, so the social return on investment, if I not remember numbers correctly, was around 23x, which is better than any return that you get from, you know, a stock market or, you know, from any other investments that you make. So this is really valuable. Only thing is it's a return in terms of, you know, the social impact. It is not money that you're getting into your pocket. So I think very important to measure that, and yes, you know.
Yeah. And I think, Jayant, you are looking at direct impact, right? I think we're also not even seeing the indirect impact. Absolutely. Because then the one person skill, actually the community impact and the intergenerational impact of that one person, you know, educated or skilled, will take it from 23 to 230x.
Correct. See, because every time, you know, you educate someone, the person gets into a job, it has a direct impact on the siblings. It has a direct impact on the family. In fact, we look at family income doubling, you know, when even one person gets employed, you know. So it really has a massive impact, and you're absolutely right. It's many times more if you do.
And role modeling, right? So with working with women, you will hear this all the time.
Good point.
That, you know, when they see one woman in the village has taken a stand and done something, got skilled, set up a shop, etc. Number of younger women now have a newer role model to look at, right? And then that, you know, they come up to her and they'll say, and women love it, right? They say, okay, we've created a job, but we've also created opportunity for 5 other girls in my village, right? So it's role modeling is a very important social return.
Sure. Gabriel, I'll pass one question to you. While talking about evidence, what can be done to measure and consolidate the vast amount of skilling that is done by government, NGOs, PPPs landscape that currently seems to be operating in silos?
Let me rephrase your question. You're really asking on what would be a big change in terms of having some sort of a improvement in data management or data collection. Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, in the case of ILO, I think we are advocating for global skills taxonomy and standardized indicators. And during the G20 hosted by India last year, this has been discussed in terms of maybe we can have a standardized taxonomy, and I think the Ministry of Skills Development is now into it. But the point that I would like to highlight in terms of this global skills taxonomy and standard indicators that this is a prerequisite in terms of the move of the Ministry of Labor of India to do a global skills gap, which also was one part of the G20 agreement under the employment group. And ILO is working with the government of India on this. And before we can do that, really we have to use the standard taxonomy and indicators. And basically, the advantage of having the standardized indicators is it's very easy to get to gather data across India, across states, and even globally. And this can be served as an input to an evidence-based policy recommendations.
Better data collection. We don't have good data collection, so I think if you have to bring it to a systemized session, programs, we first have to have better data across it. And I think if I had one request, I think CSR law today doesn't allow you to use skilling, your CSR for skilling for your own organizations, right? But, if you could actually have that program, which could then bring together your private sector, your social sector, and your and your public sector. Yeah, so because then you're effectively saying, I know what skills I need in my organization. I can best teach that. I can use the CSR money to skill people and then actually provide them a job in my organization, right? So that could kind of help bring all of that system together.
Sure, I think we have time for one last question. Livelihood in women is largely a systemic issue, heavily influenced by their families and by their health, rather than a skill issue. What is the way forward? Ladies in the panel? Yeah. So livelihood is largely a systemic issue driven by, let's say their health or their family obligations, rather than just being a skilling issue. What is the solution?
So I can start off here and speak to some data points we've seen. So in our 2 to 5 year survey of our alumni in India, for example, we saw that 30%, close to 30% of women have chosen to opt out of the workforce. So if you're looking at the potential of how do we influence and reduce the gaps that we are seeing for women, there's still 70% of women who are in the workforce employed at lower levels than their male peers. So how do we first bridge that gap, I think is the first question. Second, for those who have chosen to opt out, we also ask, why is it? And only about 30% or so of those who have chosen to opt out are saying it's because of family reasons, health reasons, and so on. And there's a huge other set of reasons why they're opting out. Some of them are opting out because they are in education and they will eventually get back to the workforce. Some of them are opting out because of travel and logistical reasons. So I think there is a systemic issue that just skilling organizations cannot influence, but there is a portion even among people who are removing themselves from the labor force that we can address. What that intervention looks like, I think, is something we at Generation are still trying to solve. How much can we make it a part of our programs or not, or it has to come externally. But we definitely see that there is a portion that we can impact. The other piece that I spoke about is how are they looking in terms of professional development. So when we saw how the trajectory of our alumni progresses, we saw that people who are in continuous employment, even excluding switching for another job and so on, they tend to have the best outcomes. And I think the reasons are obvious for us. So if more women are seeking that I'm not able to get myself promoted in this, so I'll just switch to another job, and then that scars them in their employment journey in some way, that's another potential area that we can reduce by mentorship, networking, professional development support, and so on. So I think even within this globe of systemic issues, we have pockets that skilling organizations can influence.
Yeah.
Over to you.
No, absolutely agree. Skilling increases the chance of a rural woman of getting employed by 50% and that of an urban woman by 30%, right? I think that speaks enough.
Thank you so much. For me, this was a very interesting panel to moderate. I hope the audience also enjoyed the interaction. We really don't have time for questions, but I think there can be questions after this in the common area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek, and the extremely good panel. And it was a great and super grounded panel. It was touching on all the realisms, and what was a great takeaway is that when the impact is a goal, then data becomes a great torchlight, leading you way forward. So that was the greatest takeaway. Thank you very much for coming here and being a part of this panel. So just some announcement. We will have a 10-minute break. So this is continuing Chai and Coffee Pe Charcha. You can continue here. And all our panelists would be available. I'm just taking the liberty and telling. Just you could network on your left side, just the back end. There is a full networking area where you could sit and chat if you needed some more of their time. And then we will be back here for the next session after the 10-minute break. So the next session here is going to be back-to-back 2 sessions without a break. So we will break now and we'll be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.